The taxi driver missed my exit. Not by accident. Not because he was distracted. Not because of traffic. He drove right past it. I leaned forward from the back seat and pointed toward the glowing green highway sign. "Excuse me, that was exit 14. The driver's hands tightened around the steering wheel. For a moment, he didn't answer. Streetlights flashed across his weathered face. Then he said something that made my heart stop. "Your father already paid me." I froze. The words didn't make sense. My father had been dead for 23 years. The taxi suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. Too cold. I stared at the back of the driver's head. "What did you just say?" His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. The sadness in them hit me before the meaning did. "I said your father already paid me." The world seemed to tilt. My father was gone. Buried. I had stood beside his grave. I had watched my mother cry. I had spent half my life wishing I could ask him one more question. So how could a stranger be talking about him as if they'd spoken yesterday? The driver swallowed hard. Then he whispered. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, Emily." And suddenly I wasn't worried about missing my exit anymore. I was terrified of where this ride was actually going. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 42 years old. I work as a financial advisor in Chicago. Most people would probably describe me as successful. Nice condo. Good salary. No debt. No drama. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. The truth was much messier. Because success has a funny way of hiding loneliness. My father died when I was 19. A heart attack. Sudden. Cruel. One minute he was laughing at a barbecue. The next he was gone. My mother never recovered. Neither did I. 23 years later, I still caught myself reaching for the phone whenever something good happened. I still wanted to call him. I still wanted to hear him say, "That's my girl." Instead, all I had were memories. And memories don't answer back. Friday nights were the hardest. They always had been. So every Friday after work, I followed the same routine. Dinner downtown. Then a taxi ride home. Not because I couldn't drive. Because it gave me 30 quiet minutes where nobody expected anything from me. About 6 months before that strange night, I'd started noticing the same taxi driver. His name was Victor. Late 60s. Gray hair. Deep laugh lines. Kind eyes. The kind of man who reminded you of somebody's favorite uncle. The first time I rode with him, he helped an elderly woman load groceries before picking me up. The second time, he refused to charge a college student who was short $10. After that, I started requesting him whenever possible. And every Friday, I tipped him. Generously. $20. Sometimes 30. One rainy evening he laughed. "You know you don't have to keep doing that." "Sure I do." "Why?" I smiled. "Because good people are hard to find." For a second something strange crossed his face. Pain. Recognition. I couldn't tell. Then he nodded quietly. "My friend used to say that." "Who?" He looked back at the road. "Someone I miss." At the time, I didn't think much about it. Now I wished I had. Because looking back, the clues had been there from the beginning. I just hadn't seen them. 3 months later, something else happened. I climbed into Victor's cab after a terrible day. A client had threatened to leave. My boss was impossible. And my ex-husband had chosen that exact morning to announce his engagement to a woman 10 years younger than me. I wasn't exactly cheerful. Victor glanced at me in the mirror. "Bad day?" "You could say that." "Want advice?" I laughed. "Sure." He smiled. "The people who leave your life make room for the people who belong in it." I stared at him. My father used to say those exact words. Not something similar. Not close. The exact words. A chill crawled down my arms. My dad used to say that. Victor's smile disappeared. For a moment, he looked shocked. Then he quickly looked away. Smart man. I spent the rest of the ride staring out the window. Something felt off. But I couldn't explain why. The next Friday, I brought it up. My father used to have dozens of sayings like that. Victor's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. What was his name? Daniel Carter. The cab swerved slightly. Only for a second. But I noticed. Victor noticed that I noticed. Neither of us spoke. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The following week, things got even stranger. I accidentally left my phone in the cab. By the time I realized it, Victor was already back at my building. When I ran downstairs, he was standing outside holding it. Relieved, I reached for the phone. Then I noticed what was on his screen. A photograph. Old. Faded. Two young men standing beside a pickup truck. One of them was Victor. The other was my father. 25 years younger. My heart nearly stopped. Victor saw where I was looking. His face turned pale. He immediately locked the screen. Too late. I'd already seen it. How do you know my father? The question hung between us. Victor looked like a man deciding whether to jump off a cliff. Then another cab pulled up behind him and honked. The moment broke. I'll tell you someday. He climbed back into the taxi. And drove away. Leaving me standing on the sidewalk. Shaking. That night I barely slept. The next morning I drove straight to my mother's house. When I showed her Victor's photo, all the color drained from her face. She dropped her coffee mug. It shattered across the kitchen floor. Neither of us moved. My mother stared at the picture. Then she whispered a name I'd never heard before. Victor Reynolds. You know him? Her eyes filled with tears. A look of pure fear crossed her face. And then she said something that changed everything. He should never have found you. I felt my stomach drop. What does that mean? My mother slowly sank into a chair. The photograph trembled in her hands. And for the first time in 23 years. She looked terrified of my father. And I knew she was hiding something. Something big enough to make an old photograph feel dangerous. Something connected to the taxi driver. Something she had lied about for decades. And I was determined to uncover the truth. But I had no idea that by the end of the week, everything I believed about my family would be shattered. The entire drive home from my mother's house felt unreal. One sentence kept repeating in my head. He should never have found you. Found me? Not met me. Not recognized me. Found me. As if I'd been hidden. As if Victor had been searching. By the time I reached my condo, my hands were shaking. I called my mother 3 times. She didn't answer. On the 4th call, she finally picked up. Mom. Silence. Tell me what's going on. Her voice sounded exhausted. Emily, please leave this alone. No. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Another silence. Then she whispered. Some truths only hurt people. I felt anger rising. 23 years ago Dad died. Now I discover his friend has been driving me home for months, and you're telling me not to ask questions? My mother began crying. Not loud crying. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from carrying something for too long. Please, Emily. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone. My mother had never hung up on me before. Not once. That terrified me more than anything. The next Friday couldn't come fast enough. All week I waited. All week I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with Victor. Every smile. Every strange reaction. Every familiar phrase. By Friday evening, I was desperate for answers. When I stepped outside the restaurant, Victor's taxi was waiting. As if he knew I would call. As if he knew I was coming. I climbed into the back seat. Neither of us spoke. The city lights slid across the windows. Finally, I broke the silence. "My mother knows you." Victor nodded. "Yes." "Who are you?" His hands tightened around the steering wheel. For a moment I thought he might refuse again. Instead, he pulled the taxi into a quiet parking lot overlooking Lake Michigan. The engine idled. The city shimmered in the distance. Victor turned around. His eyes looked older than I'd ever seen them. "I was your father's best friend." The words hit hard. But not hard enough. There was more. I could feel it. My mother acted like she'd seen a ghost. Victor looked away. Because she buried more than one secret when Daniel died. My heart started pounding. What secret? Victor reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly. Carefully. He removed an envelope. Yellowed with age. The paper looked decades old. My name was written across the front. Not in Victor's handwriting. In my father's. I recognized it instantly. My breath caught. "That's impossible." Victor's voice trembled. "No. It's very possible." I stared at the envelope. My father's handwriting. My name. Emily. The room suddenly felt smaller. "What is this?" "A letter." "Why didn't you give it to me before?" His jaw tightened. "Because I promised Daniel I wouldn't." I looked at him in disbelief. "You promised a dead man?" Victor's eyes filled with tears. "Every day." I couldn't breathe. My fingers shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page. I unfolded it carefully. The date at the top read: April 11th, 2001. 2 weeks before my father's death. My vision blurred. I started reading. "If you're reading this, sweetheart, then something happened before I could explain everything myself." The words instantly shattered me. I heard my father's voice. The way he always called me sweetheart. The way he always started serious conversations. Tears rolled down my face. I kept reading. There are people in life who save us without anybody knowing. Victor is one of those people. I looked up. Victor was staring at the dashboard. Unable to meet my eyes. "If I am gone, trust him." My hands trembled. "One day he may need to tell you something I couldn't." I stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs. Something I couldn't? What did that mean? I looked at Victor. "What is this about?" His eyes closed. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he whispered. "Your father didn't die believing the story you've been told." A chill swept through me. "What story?" Victor looked straight at me. "The story that your grandfather abandoned him." Everything inside me froze. My grandfather. The man I'd never met. The man my father supposedly hated. The man who walked out on his family when Dad was a child. I had heard that story my entire life. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every family gathering. The villain of every family story was always the same. My grandfather. A selfish man who disappeared. A man who never came back. A man nobody spoke about. What does that have to do with anything? Victor swallowed hard. Because your father discovered the truth 6 months before he died. The parking lot suddenly felt silent. Too silent. What truth? Victor's voice cracked. His father never abandoned him. The words exploded inside my head. What? He spent 40 years believing a lie. I stared at him. No. It's true. No. Victor nodded slowly. He spent most of his life searching for answers. I felt dizzy. Everything I'd ever known was being rewritten. What happened? Victor looked toward the lake. The man your father thought abandoned him never stopped looking for him. My pulse pounded. What are you saying? Victor opened his wallet. He removed an old photograph. A different one. This picture showed a younger man. Dark hair. Kind eyes. Holding a little boy. The little boy was my father. I stared at the picture. Then at Victor. Then back at the picture. What happened to him? Victor's eyes filled with tears. He was told his son died. I stopped breathing. The world tilted. What? For 40 years he believed your father was dead. The silence afterward felt endless. Impossible. Cruel. Heartbreaking. I imagined two people. Father and son. Both alive. Both grieving. Both believing the other was gone forever. My chest physically hurt. Who would do that? Victor looked at me sadly. You already know. And suddenly, I understood. My mother. The fear. The panic. The broken coffee mug. The tears. She knew. She had always known. The realization made me sick. I climbed out of the taxi. I needed air. Needed space. Needed reality to make sense again. But it didn't. Nothing made sense anymore. Victor stepped out behind me. The wind coming off the lake whipped around us. Emily. I turned. What? His eyes glistened. The man who held your father in that picture is still alive. I froze. Every sound disappeared. Every thought stopped. Victor's voice barely rose above a whisper. He's 87 now. My heart nearly stopped. What are you saying? Victor looked at me with a sadness so deep it broke something inside me. Then he spoke the words that changed my life forever. Your grandfather has been waiting 40 years to meet you. And at that moment, I realized the biggest secret wasn't buried with my father. It was still alive. Waiting for me. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every memory I had of my father suddenly felt different. Every story. Every photograph. Every family gathering where my mother spoke about the grandfather I never met. All of it sat under a giant question mark. At 7 the next morning, Victor picked me up. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. My stomach twisted tighter with every mile. We were heading toward a small town almost 2 hours outside Chicago. The town where my grandfather lived. The town where he'd spent 40 years believing his son was dead. The thought broke my heart every time it crossed my mind. What if he doesn't want to see me? I finally asked. Victor gave me a sad smile. Emily, he's waited longer for this moment than you've been alive. I looked out the window. The trees blurred past. Part of me still hoped this was some terrible misunderstanding. Because the alternative was almost too painful. An entire family stolen by a lie. We reached a modest white house shortly before noon. Nothing about it looked remarkable. Small porch. Flower boxes beneath the windows. An old rocking chair. The kind of place you'd drive past without noticing. Yet my hands were shaking. Because inside that house was the man connected to every missing piece of my father's life. Victor parked the taxi. For a moment neither of us moved. Then he quietly said, "Ready?" No. Not even close. But I nodded anyway. We walked to the front door. Victor knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. An elderly man stood there. Thin. Gray-haired. Slightly bent with age. But his eyes. The moment I saw them, my breath caught. They were my father's eyes. Exactly the same. The same kindness. The same warmth. The same sadness. The old man stared at me. Then at Victor. Then back at me. His lips began trembling. No. The word barely came out. His eyes filled instantly. I felt tears forming in my own. Victor gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Frank. The old man looked at me again. Oh my God. His voice broke. He lifted a trembling hand toward my face. Not touching me. Just looking. As if he were afraid I might disappear. You look exactly like him. I couldn't speak. Neither could he. For several seconds we simply stood there crying. Complete strangers. Connected by the same missing person. Finally he whispered. You're Daniel's daughter. I nodded. And that was all it took. The 87-year-old man completely broke down. He wrapped both arms around me. And cried like a father who had finally found his family. Inside the house, photographs covered nearly every wall. Most of them showed my father. School pictures. Sports pictures. Graduation pictures. Wedding pictures. Pictures I'd never seen before. My chest tightened. How did you get these? Frank smiled sadly. I spent years collecting anything I could find. I stared at him. Years. Decades. Trying to piece together a life he was told no longer existed. We sat together in the living room. A small wooden box rested on the coffee table. Frank touched it carefully. I always hoped I'd get to give this to Daniel myself. My throat tightened. What is it? He opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters. Hundreds of pages. Neatly organized. Dated. Stacked. I looked at him in confusion. Frank smiled sadly. Letters to my son. I felt my heart break. You wrote all these? Every birthday. His voice trembled. Every Christmas. I couldn't stop crying. Even when you thought he was gone? Frank nodded. Especially then. The room fell silent. I opened one letter carefully. The paper had yellowed with age. The date read 27 years earlier. I began reading. Dear Daniel. Today would have been your 38th birthday. I hope wherever you are, somebody loves you as much as I do. I couldn't continue. The tears came too hard. Frank looked away. I never stopped writing. My chest physically hurt. 40 years. 40 years of birthdays. 40 years of missing his son. 40 years stolen. Then came the hardest conversation of all. Tell me what happened. Frank closed his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he quietly explained everything. When my father was 8 years old, Frank and my grandmother divorced. The separation became ugly. Painful. Bitter. One day she left with my father. Then disappeared. Frank spent years searching. Private investigators. Court records. Every lead he could find. Nothing. Eventually he received documents claiming his son had died in a car accident. The documents were fake. But he didn't know that. No parent would question something so horrific. He mourned. Buried an empty coffin. And spent decades believing it. My stomach twisted. Did my father ever learn the truth? Frank looked toward Victor. Victor nodded slowly. He did. The answer shocked me. What? Frank's eyes filled again. 6 months before he died. The room suddenly felt smaller. What happened? Victor answered. Daniel found me. I turned toward him. He smiled sadly. We never lost touch after childhood. The pieces finally clicked together. Everything. The taxi. The photographs. The letter. The familiar sayings. Victor hadn't just known my father. He had carried his final promise. Frank's voice shook. Your father came here. I stared. He met you? Frank nodded. The tears immediately returned. He stood exactly where you're sitting. I covered my mouth. Oh my God. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Frank smiled through tears. He hugged me. The old man's shoulders shook. And for the first time in 40 years, I got my son back. I cried openly. So did Victor. So did Frank. Then Frank's smile faded. Because there was still one terrible truth left. My father had died only months later. Just after finding the family he'd lost. Just after getting a second chance. Life had finally given him back his father. Then taken him away. The cruelty of it hurt. But Victor wasn't finished. There was one more thing. He reached into his jacket. Another envelope. Another letter. This one addressed to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was my father's handwriting. The final letter he'd ever written. Emily. If you're reading this, Victor finally ignored my instructions. I laughed through my tears. Victor smiled. Sounds like him. I continued reading. Sweetheart, if life gives you something back that it once stole, don't waste time being angry about the years you lost. Love the people you still have. Forgive when you can. And never let pride keep family apart. My vision blurred. The final line nearly destroyed me. Tell my father I'm still grateful he never stopped looking for me. I couldn't speak. Neither could Frank. The old man simply cried. A month later, my mother finally told the truth. Every painful detail. Every mistake. Every lie. There was no screaming. No revenge. No hatred. Just sadness. Because some people make terrible choices while trying to protect themselves. And those choices hurt generations. It took time. A lot of time. But eventually forgiveness came. Not because anyone deserved it. Because carrying bitterness hurts the person holding it. Today, every Friday, I still take a taxi. Only now Victor refuses my tips. Every single time. And every single time I argue. Last Friday I tried slipping $20 into his cup holder. He laughed and handed it back. Your father already paid me. I smiled through tears. Because now I finally understood what he meant. Years ago, my father had saved his best friend. Protected him. Helped him through the darkest season of his life. Victor wasn't repaying money. He was repaying love. And some debts are too beautiful to measure in dollars. When I visit Frank now, we sit on his porch for hours. We tell stories about my father. We laugh. We cry. And every time I leave, he hugs me tightly and says the same thing. The people who leave your life make room for the people who belong in it. My father used to say that. Victor says it too. Now I do. Because sometimes family isn't lost. Sometimes it's simply waiting for the truth to find its way home.